On the day of their wedding, autumn leaves fell across the capital. By dusk, amid wind and rain, the wedding procession entered Lord Mu's mansion. Yi Xuan was marrying Mu Qing, the third son of the family and a widely admired figure. Known for his exceptional talents in both literature and martial arts, Qing was beloved by many young ladies. Yet they all pitied him for being forced to marry a woman from a humble family. At the wedding, whispers spread, with some commenting on Xuan's good fortune, while others gossiped she had schemed her way into this marriage. A month ago, during the emperor's birthday celebration, Xuan was seen standing next to Qing, when fireworks lit up the sky. The emperor, enchanted by their appearance together, granted their marriage on the spot. However, after learning of her background, many believed the match was unsuitable. Now, sitting alone in her wedding chamber, Xuan waited. Her maid, Mei, anxiously mentioned that the Mu family had originally planned for Qing to marry someone else, Miss Fu, who had grown up with him. Hours passed, Qing still hadn't returned home. Mei's voice trembled as she spoke. It's almost midnight, and still no sign of him. What if he doesn't come at all? Xuan remained calm, assuring Mei the emperor has decreed this marriage. He will come out of duty, but even if he didn't, it wouldn't change anything. Just before midnight, the soft sound of footsteps approached the door. Mei, startled, retreated to the shadows as the doors opened, revealing Mu Qing. The cold breeze that followed him into the room sent a shiver through the air. Without looking at Xuan, he walked deeper into the room, his presence distant and unwelcoming. Xuan rose, bowing in respect, but Qing only gave her a brief nod before sitting down on a chair by the screen. Finally, Qing spoke, his voice devoid of warmth. Now that you are part of this family, your words and actions will represent me. You must be mindful of your conduct at all time. His eyes never met hers, focused instead on the flickering candlelight. He continued, I'm busy with my duties and won't have time for matters of the household. Handle them as you see fit, but don't come to me unless it's absolutely necessary. After a long pause, Qing rose from his chair. Without another word, he stepped through the door and disappeared into the night, leaving Xuan in the cold and empty room once more. Mei returned, frustrated. He didn't even stay. After all this, he only came to set rules. Xuan silenced her with a glance and spoke gently, It's better this way. Some things should happen naturally, in their own time. The next morning, Xuan found Qing in formal attire waiting for her. Xuan quietly greeted him and sat down. He asked, Are you adjusting to life here? She smiled and said everything is fine. After an awkward breakfast, she accidentally touched his hand while pouring tea. Qing subtly wiped it away. She noticed but said nothing, following him to greet the parents. Inside, Lord Mu and Lady Mu sat proudly. Attendants from the royal family stood by on either side. Qing and Xuan knelt to offer their respects. Lord Mu, seeing his daughter-in-law's beauty and elegance in front of everybody, quite matching his son in appearance, felt a bit relieved. He remarked a perfect match, just as the emperor intended. But his comment was met with silence from everyone else, including Lady Mu. Lady Mu, watching the couple leave, grew teary-eyed, quietly murmuring, My poor son. Life in the household remained distant. He did not seek her company, nor did she chase after his. Yet, between the silences, small moments unfolded. Xuan carved a space for herself, a medicinal garden, something familiar, something hers. She planted each one with care. At first, Qing paid no mind, but one evening, after long hours buried in work, exhaustion weighed on his body. A cup of herbal tea sat waiting on his desk. Its scent is familiar, soothing. He did not ask where it came from, but he knew. Xuan never sought acknowledgement, never waited for thanks. She simply cared, in the quiet way that people do when they do not expect anything in return. Qing returns late that night, weary from endless responsibilities. As he steps through the corridor, his eyes land on a silhouette against the lantern-lit sky. Xuan, poised and elegant, lost in thought. For the first time, Qing does not see her as a duty, but as a person. Qing hesitates in the shadow, watching the light reflect against her features. Then, in an almost reluctant gesture, he speaks. The courtyard, it thrives because of you. Xuan looks up and responds softly. Herbs do not ask for much, only time and patience. Qing does not reply, but later that night, as he sits in his study, the words remain in his head longer than he expects them to. With the passing of seasons, the silences between them shift. What was once an emptiness filled with distance has become something else entirely, something neither of them can name. Though their words remain few, their gestures have begun to speak in their place. One evening Qing returned from a longer journey, in his hand, a book. Its silk cover embroidered with delicate patterns, the edges slightly worn from travel. He set a book down on her table, a rare medicinal tome not easily found. Later that night, when Xuan noticed the book, she hesitated for a moment. As her fingers brushing over the cover, she recognized the book immediately, one she had once spoken of in passing. She had not expected him to listen, let alone remember. Affection does not arrive all at once. It does not crash like a storm or burn like fire. Sometimes, it comes gently, like a sing breeze, like a glance held a second longer than before, like the quiet presence of someone who no longer feels like a stranger. A cool autumn breeze drifts through the open-air hallways, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. Xuan walks with quiet steps, her arms wrapped loosely around herself as she makes her way back to her room. Her silk robe flutters slightly in the wind, the fabric too thin to keep the cold at bay. Cheng, walking from the opposite direction, notices her from a distance. His gaze lingers on the way she folded her arms tighter against herself. His steps slow down as they near each other. As they're crossing paths, Xuan bows her head slightly in acknowledgement, as she always does. Qing does not speak. Instead, as they're passing, he removes his outer robe in one fluid motion and drapes it over her shoulders. Xuan's breath stills for a brief moment. The fabric is warm, carrying the faint scent of ink and sandalwood. He does not stop. He does not wait for thanks. By the time she turns in to glance at him, he has already walked ahead. Xuan remains still for a moment. Her fingers brush lightly over the soft fabric of the robe. Her lips part slightly, as if to speak, but she stays silent. Instead, she adjusts the robe around herself, pulling it closer. Warmth lingers where his hands had been. A stormy night, thunder rumbles through the estate. Xuan sits by dimly lit candle, lost in thought. Then, a sharp gust of wind pushes open the doors. Qing stands at the entrance, his robes clinging to his form, drenched from the storm. Xuan rises. Without hesitation, she moves to fetch warm towels and dry robes. She does not question why he has returned so late in such a state. A quiet understanding has begun to bloom between them. Xuan steps closer. Carefully, she reaches up, pressing the towel against King's damp hair. The gesture is small, yet something in it makes King's breath hitch. For a man accustomed to solitude, to walls built high and unyielding, something unfamiliar tugging at the edges of his guarded heart. His fingers tighten at his sides, as though resisting the urge to touch her, to anchor himself to this fleeting moment of softness. Xuan moves with practiced ease, preparing to the way she always does. "You should change before you catch a cold," she murmurs. Her voice is mild, neither chiding nor commanding. Just a gentle statement, an offering of concern. Qing watches her. He has seen her in passing, has shared meals in silence, but never has he truly seen her. Not like this. Not as someone willing to welcome him home. Not with expectation, but with quiet acceptance. Qing takes a slow sip of tea, the warmth spreading through him. Xuan sits nearby. Their silence is no longer distant, but peaceful. For the first time, Qing lingers. He does not rush to his study, does not retreat behind formalities. Instead, he sits, the rain outside continuing its song against the window. Xuan, without a word, allows him to stay. The candle flickers between them, casting a soft glow. The storm rages on, but inside, there is comfort. The next morning during breakfast, the two of them are sitting side by side, their hands lightly touching. Xuan turns to Qing, a small smile on her lips. He looks at her for a long moment. Finally, he moves his hand gently over hers. Their marriage began with duty, shaped by silence and distance. But time, in its quiet, patient way, wove them together. Xuan found her place, not in seeking his affection, but in grounding herself in the life she created. Qing, a man who had always known restraint, found himself drawn to her quiet perseverance. Without realizing when or how, they became a refuge for each other. Not through words, but through presence, through knowing that, no matter how heavy the storm outside, they have each other at home.